So I had the great privilege and honor to work with, to learn from, and be mentored by Tom in the brief time I spent in public service and the much longer time he spent, not only working for the Clinton administration, but most recently for the Obama administration as the head of policy for the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the head of innovation with the National Economic Council. Tom is now with the Wendy and Eric Schmidt group. And has made the shift to thinking to the world, from the world of government to the world of philanthropy, but no less to thinking about big ideas. But I know that people here will be very curious and interested to know if you can tell us something about the ways in which you, in your capacity in the Obama administration, together with colleagues, help to invest in and harness collective intelligence, help to make those investments that Jeff talked about.
Sure. And thanks for the invitation to this conference. So I'll provide a couple of different case studies. One is, and this is something that we had an opportunity to work on together, is to increase the federal government's use of incentive prizes. So when I worked for President Clinton, I worked with DARPA to get them prize authority, which they used for the self-driving car competition, which Sebastian Thrun won the second time around. Larry Page was at the finish line, and he promptly acquired the winning team, which was the genesis of the Google self-driving car competition. So during the Obama administration, we were able to pass legislation that gave every agency the authority to support incentive prizes. We worked with the GSA to create challenge.gov. We recruited people to be the sort of champion and advocate for incentive prizes within the executive branch. And so as a result, by the end of the administration, agencies had supported over 700 incentive prizes. So that's an example of some of the steps that we did to increase the ability of federal agencies to take advantage of collective intelligence.
Anything that you tried that didn't work? Those are the great success stories.
Yeah, so, one of the things that I was interested in is prediction markets. So I was interested in the question of could we eliminate some of the legal and regulatory barriers to prediction markets, because there was a lot of ambiguity as to whether if you did this, you would be regulated by the CFTC or not. We made less progress on that than I would have liked. We did have instances of federal departments and agencies beginning to use prediction markets, particularly around technology forecasting.
Technology forecasting.
Yep.
And now that you, let me say, I think, there's an invisible elephant, obviously, in the room that as we think about what it means for the federal government now, the federal government we have today, these great success stories of citizen science and its uptake, crowdsourcing, open innovation, challenge prizes, et cetera, experiments around prediction markets. Can we where is the locus for this innovation in policymaking going to come from now? Is there any hope for people in the room? Should we be retreating into the academy even further? Or does any of this work on collective intelligence have applications? We heard about a lot of commercial and social sector things from Jeff,
Sure.
And maybe we all should go to the UK, but is there...
No,
is there any hope here?
I think that there's a really important role for agenda setting that is for a field like collective intelligence to say, given where we are in 2017, where would we like to be over the short, medium, and long term, and what are the public and private actions that will move us in the right direction? And as we say in Northern California, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. But the reason that I think that this is important is, number one, federal departments and agencies at sort of the civil service level will continue to have some level of autonomy to pursue interesting ideas, number one. Number two, this is an area where it has been able to get bipartisan collaboration in Congress. So we were able to work with Congress, for example, on the prize legislation, on legislation that created a legal framework for equity-based crowdfunding, and most recently on legislation that encouraged agencies to embrace citizen science and crowdsourcing. And then finally, there are opportunities for philanthropists and foundations and universities and companies and nonprofits to create more ad hoc coalitions of the willing and able. So I still think that this, answering this question is, what's next and who would need to do what in order to move the ball forward is a valuable exercise to go through.
Right. Well, we can. We're going to get ready for when when there is somebody to talk to in the federal government besides Congress. So you mentioned, though, this is a great a segue. You mentioned the role that philanthropy can play. You have obviously made the move now from the White House to being in philanthropy. Can you say a little bit more about what that agenda looks like and what you see that role as being?
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're sort of most excited about?
I think. Philanthropy can play an important role in a couple of areas. One is that they can be more nimble, and they can try to figure out by talking to leading academics and practitioners where they think the key leverage points are. So, for example, one of the things that I've been really interested in with respect to incentive prizes is that we have growing data about the relative cost effectiveness of this approach relative to traditional grants and contracts. So some agencies that have done essentially experiments where they've tried both a incentive prize crowdsourcing approach and a more traditional contracting approach are saying that they're getting the same or better results at 1/10 the cost. So one of the questions I'm interested in is, why is it still relatively exotic? Why is this still being used in a very small fraction of the time? And one hypothesis that I have is that there's just not there's a human capital problem, that there's not enough people who know how to do this well. So that's an area where I think philanthropy could play a role, is to support those people who do know how to do this well, but may not have taken the time to say, how do I communicate this to a broader audience? So the sort of memory that Jeff was talking about. How can you take a series of skills around problem definition and problems framing and the design of different crowdsourcing or incentive prize approaches and develop both online learning and experiential learning that would scale up the number of people that know how to do this well. If you decide I need a lawyer or an accountant or a Java programmer, you don't have a shortage of people that you could go out and hire to do that work. But if you said, I want someone who's actually had the experience of designing an incentive prize, I think we're still limited by the number of people who know how to do that well.
That surely jives with our experience. But apropos of skill building and experience, if I can, just between us, I had a nickname for the time spent with Tom. I used to refer to it as bullet point boot camp, because Tom is the person who helped take me, an academic who was used to writing 100 pages, and turn me into somebody who knew how to write 1 page, which is one of the skills of the realm when you are a policy geek, to use Jeff's term, for getting stuff done in busy places like Washington and elsewhere, where you need to be able to have the ability to drive through change and to implement it. And Tom, you always had a lot of these great sort of tricks and techniques for training us untrainable, whether it's academics or millennials. And one of those was a thing you used to refer to as the magic laptop experiment. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share what the magic laptop experiment is.
Sure. The thought experiment is that you have a magic laptop, and the power of the laptop is that any press release that you write will come true. And what you have to do is to come up with a headline that is the goal statement, several paragraphs that provide context, and paragraph-level descriptions of who is agreeing to do what, in the form individual or organization A takes action B so that C. And there were a couple of reasons why I posed that thought experiment. One is to give the members of my team a sense of agency, a sense that the status quo is not fixed, but is potentially changeable. So if you have the ability to send a decision memo to President Obama and he checks the box that says yes, your view of what is potentially changeable should be fairly expansive. That's number one. Second is the value of concreteness. That is, things happen in the world when particular individuals and organizations take some action in the pursuit of some goal. So you are just more likely to be effective in driving change if you can articulate who would need to do what in order to make progress. And one of the constraints on the Magic Laptop experiment is that it had to be at least plausible that if the right person called all of the organizations on your press release, that they would be both willing and able. So for example, you couldn't ask a publicly traded firm to take some action that was directly contrary to the interests of their shareholders, or to have an agency to take some action that is against the law, unless your press release also included Congress passes a law. But once we were able to articulate, oh, okay, given this goal that we're trying to achieve, this is the coalition of the willing and able that we need to build, then we could see if that was plausible.
So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because obviously if we're trying to move this field forward, if we're trying to institutionalize collective intelligence to a greater extent and more problem solving using these techniques, do you have your own answer to the Magic Laptop questions? What would you ask of us in terms of building the field and building the acceptance of these practices?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to figure out what are those areas where the government is preventing the use of some of these approaches. So, a good example would be in the area of prediction markets, where I think that there is a lot of unnecessary legal and regulatory uncertainty. So that's one role for policy, is to make sure that there are no barriers to the utilization. The second is to identify those areas where the government can be a user and a funder of collective intelligence. I think one really interesting area that a scholar by the name of Tony Breik has been pushing is the idea of networked improvement communities. This is, given that we have 14,000 different school districts, how do you create communities of people that are all working to solve a particular problem, to be in constant touch with each other, so that as they're engaging in local experimentation to solve a particular problem, in his case, the problem that he's interested in solving is that most students who take remedial math at the community college level never go on to successfully complete college level math. So he's created a networked improvement community around that problem. So I'd say, remove the barriers, get the government involved as a user, and then also continue to invest in research and development and pilots, or understanding about how to use these approaches is also advanced.
That's great. So we're going to, before we just wrap up this segment, what we're going to do is have questions for Tom at the end after we hear from our next two speakers. So hold the thoughts or tweet the thoughts, which he can follow in the interim. And we're going to have Dana come up and do her presentation, and then Darlene, and then we're going to wrap everybody up together for questions. So let me just give you a final word. Sorry, you're going to, yeah.
Yes, the final word is to take advantage of the collective intelligence in the auditorium. If you have a great idea for what you think the policy agenda should be, or more broadly, the sort of agenda for the field should be, you can send them to collectiveintelligence@thegovlab.org. Thank you.
That's correct. So, or we also have, just a reminder again, we have the bit.ly page with notes. So if we can encourage you also to log on, and if others want to log on and continue the conversation there in more in long form, we can also get some ideas going in real time.